We are back, baby. We are back. Katie George, Laurence Edmondson, Nate Saunders. Welcome to Unlapped. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move over to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. And remember, if you're watching us on YouTube, like this video, leave us a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the new ESPN F1 channel for all things F1 all season long. And if you're listening, please hit us with a 5-star review. It is so good to see you guys. How are you, Nate? Laurence?
Really good, Katie. This has been about 3 months, I think, 4 months.
Too long, basically.
Saudi. Yeah.
Way too long.
So, no, yeah, it's great to see you. And yeah, I mean, the weird thing is we're not even halfway into the season yet. So you've not missed a huge amount, but you have missed quite a lot in the same time, you know? It's kind of a weird.
Have
I
you
feel
been
like
watching,
I've missed
Katie?
a lot.
Have you been keeping in touch with everything, obviously on ESPN.com, but also in the F1 world?
I have all of my alerts as always. And yeah, I have been keeping up. It's funny with the NBA season, it was a little bit tricky because you were traveling a lot on Sundays. We also had games on Sundays during the playoffs, but I obviously knew that I was going to be filling in this week. So I watched the Austrian Grand Prix. I still follow all of your all's writings. So I'm glad. I'm glad to be here. Glad to catch up with you guys and kind of get like a synopsis of where you think we are in the season thus far. Now, Laz, you were in Austria, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, both of you guys are heading to Silverstone, which we'll get to. But we've got some producer questions that have set us up for this week. Let's start here with the Papaya Wars, if you will. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but you guys can tell me. Christian Horner was recently on record saying that the championship is now a 2-horse race between the two McLarens. How do you guys see it? Nate, do you feel like there's been animosity? Do you feel like we're coming up on, what did you call it before the show, a McLaren Cold War?
I did indeed. I said it's more of a Cold War than a war, because I think we keep waiting for those two guys to fall out in some kind of big biblical way. You know, that's always been the way that Formula One kind of has been, isn't it? Is you've got two teammates fighting for the championship. Inevitably, at some point, they'll come to blows. And yet, we've seen Lando go into the back of Oscar Piastri in Canada. Oscar nearly repaid the favor, on Sunday. And yet, everything still seems. I think it's tense, but I don't think it's falling apart yet. I would agree with Horner. I think it is now a two-horse Cold War. Does that work? Does that fit in there? It's not quite as good of a metaphor, but I would agree with him. I think, we've seen enough examples now where you've had Mercedes has been the best of the rest, or Red Bull has been best of the rest. McLaren's always been up there. And if you actually look at Canada when Oscar and Lando were fighting for, was it third or fourth, at the end of that race? That was a bad weekend for them, pace-wise, and they were still right there. So hard to see anybody kind of catching them this, over the course of the season, unless, of course, they start coming to blows properly and actually taking points off each other more often. But you get the sense, don't you? And Laurence can probably talk a bit more to this, having been in Austria, but you get the sense now that McLaren have had one too many kind of heart attacks on the pit wall, one too many kind of close shaves, because we heard them kind of talking to Oscar, and we heard Oscar kind of talking about his move when kind of, well, I'll come back to it. I'll let Laurence talk about that. I think it's very interesting how both Lando and Oscar have responded to their own mistakes in that way. It seems like there's we'll get into it, but there's like a team atmosphere there. They think they're two younger guys, lots made of the fact they're Gen Z, and, they're both very kind of calm and both talk about their, I don't think they're like a lot of other title contenders we've seen before. Who knows? Maybe they'll crash this weekend and it'll all blow up, but it doesn't. You feel like these two, it's not going to do that, at least not, in the foreseeable, but maybe we're wrong. But yeah, it does feel like the attention of McLaren is now moved away from can Max or George kind of ruin this fight for us to this is between these two guys. We now need to make sure it's run in the fairest way we can.
Do you feel like this is a great job by Zach Brown managing the situation? Or do you think, as Nate kind of alluded to, maybe it's just the personality, the combination of the two drivers?
I was going to say, I think it's two things. And I think it's exactly those. I don't think it's necessarily more one than the other. But what McLaren have done really well, and I think this obviously comes down from Zach, but I think Andrea Stella has done it as well. Just being really clear with the drivers right from the start. The first thing you must not do is make contact, and we'll let you know when you're verging on kind of tipping over what we'd like to see. And there was actually an example of that in Austria when Piastri tried to overtake Lando at turn 4, locked up, narrowly missed the rear of Lando's car. I mean, that really would have turned it from a Cold War into a full-blown war, I think, if they'd made contact there. But that's where McLaren came on the radio. They said, look, we're happy for you guys to race, but that is going too far. Taking risks like that is a little step too far. And then to come back to the characters of the drivers, I think that is a key thing, because Oscar is probably the most apolitical driver I've come across in Formula One. He just wants to get in the car, get the job done, get the maximum performance from it. If he wins, he doesn't get overexcited. If he gets beaten, he doesn't go particularly down. I actually think Lando is almost like the polar opposite of that. I think it very much runs on vibes and momentum and all sorts of other things that are going on with Lando. But what Lando's shown the last few races is that his performance level can be very high. And actually, I think, he's shown over the last, I'd say 4 races at least, that his performance level on average has been higher than Oscar's. But because Oscar hasn't let that get in his head, and because Oscar's still ground out the results, that hasn't created any animosity on Oscar's side of the garage. And because Lando, things are starting to go well again, I think, that he's kind of dealt with it as well and kind of got himself out of a bit of a hole. And then the most obvious thing from the Lando side of why this is working is that when he did make the big error, the Canada error, driving into the back of his teammate, he immediately put his hand up and took the blame. And then for what sounded like a lot of talks in the weeks after that, McLaren didn't just let that slide. They really wanted to make sure that everyone that had their say on it was comfortable with where they were going into the next race. He continued to be like that, apparently, continued to just say, look, yeah, I take the blame. I'll make sure it won't happen again. One interesting thing, I know we've been talking for a while, one interesting thing that came out of that actually was that Oscar's car started to derate, which meant he ran out of battery power. So the hybrid engines run off both the V6 turbo and a battery. And actually at that moment, or just before the moment that Norris went into the back of Piastri in Canada, Piastri's car lost a little bit of power and therefore would have decelerated a little bit more. So it wasn't actually quite as simple as just a pure error from Norris. Of course, there's absolutely no blame on Piastri's side for that. And Norris still probably would have done much better by going to the other side of Piastri. He still wasn't clearly thinking as he approached the back of his teammate. But that was an interesting little nugget that came out again. And again, once they kind of dig into these issues, they seem to be able to understand them better, not throw all the blame at one driver. And I think that's why so far it's been cool and calm. What will be interesting is the final 4 races of the year, which I'm now pretty confident we'll get a title battle, and whether that kicks off then. I mean, Katie, like I say, you've been seeing bits of it. You obviously watch Austria. What do you think? Do you think that we're due for these 2 drivers to go Hamilton, Rosberg, Hamilton, Verstappen?
I don't think it is ever actually, I was just having this conversation with my husband. We were walking last night and I said, I don't think we'll ever get a season like 2021 where it came down to the final race and there was so much animosity between 2 drivers, which was cinematic. Obviously, we've talked about this for years doing this podcast. I'm curious, because the pace and the car is in such a good place overall for the team, if Zach Brown just allows this to play out and we have this battle down to the final few races, or do they eventually have to make a call, depending on what happens from now until, the next couple of months? Do they have to make a call where team orders come into effect and they're clearly backing a specific horse? There's 15 points between the 2 right now. Oscar Piastri leads with 216 points in the driver standings. Lando Norris has 201. I don't know what Zach Brown, right now it seems like he's just letting them race, and whoever wins on a given race weekend, awesome. And let's see where the chips fall where they may, which is a perfect place to be in. But I wonder at some point, does that mentality change? And I don't know if we'll see it or not. But right now, I mean, it's been so fun just watching the 2 duke it out.
Well, I think the only reason you do that is if Max gets himself back in. He's currently 61 points behind, which is a lot.
Yep.
And then if you look at the Constructors' Championship, well, because Red Bull are only scoring with 1 team, Ferrari are actually second in the Constructors' Championship as it stands after the result in Austria, but they're all about 200 points behind. So Constructors is pretty much done unless something really bizarre happens. So they don't need to worry about that. And then the more these 2 drivers move away from Verstappen, and I don't think that's anything to do with the way Verstappen's driving. I think that's purely just because everything that McLaren brings to the car seems to work. Everything that Red Bull brings to the car seems to not, maybe have a little performance gain, but maybe sacrifice something else, in another area. So I think as long as we continue on this trajectory, actually McLaren are more likely to let their drivers continue the way they are, because even now, if they both crashed into each other and took each other out of the race and Max went and won it, Max would still be behind both in the championship. So I think right now they have that flexibility. And actually, I think that flexibility is going to increase the longer we go into the season.
Well, that could happen twice, right? As well. Max could win 2 races where they both crash out. So it's not even just 1 race buffer, it's 2. So to emphasize that point even more.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating. Like, you want obviously these competing drivers, right, from different teams, like we saw with Lewis and Max in 2021. But you mentioned Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. I think sometimes the in-house competition between the 2 drivers, like, to your point, it's a done deal that McLaren's likely going to lock up the constructors. But now seeing 2 great drivers, 2 young drivers go head to head, I think makes this season all the more fascinating, even though we don't have the great players and the more parity that we were hoping for, like we saw a season ago. Do you know what I mean? At least we're giving this gift between these 2 drivers.
And there's also, as well, I think one of the things that can get overlooked in these situations is it's not just the 2 drivers. The 2 drivers are the tip of the iceberg. They're the bit we can see above the water. But obviously, there's 2 different sides to the garage at McLaren as well. And you have to ensure that you're not creating an atmosphere within the team where one side thinks that side, those guys are getting all the good calls, or those guys are getting all the good stuff. So this management that we're talking about, and exactly to what you were saying there, Katie, you've got an entire team that hasn't been winning for years and years and years, and now is. And I think that Zach Brown definitely, but Andrea Stella was there at Ferrari. He lived through all those Rubens Barrichello, Felipe Massa team orders that killed both of those drivers, kind of, where they were at, kind of mentally. So I think there's so much more going on with it, and yeah, I just think they're doing a great job of it.
And I think actually having a bit of division within the team to an extent, obviously you don't want to tear the team apart. We saw that a bit with Mercedes era with Rosberg and Hamilton. Actually, they got halfway through that partnership and they felt the need to switch the mechanics up. Not all of them, not like complete like for like, but they just mixed up the mechanics working on the 2 cars so they didn't get too divided within there. But in this situation, I don't think it's, you need your race engineer as a driver. You need your race engineer to be on your side, to be making calls that are going to work for you. And the minute the driver doesn't feel like that's the way, then you also create issues because the driver's like, well, wait a minute, why did the strategy kind of work more for that? And the team would say, well, it was in the team's best interest. But the driver's there thinking like, well, what about my best interest? And so you do need a little bit of like division within the teams. It has to happen. But that's what makes, this is why I love this sport, because you do have these inter-team battles or intra-team battles where you have these 2 sides of the garage going up against each other. What makes this one even more thrilling, I think, is that they're both going for their first title. If you look back to the Mercedes era when it was Rosberg and Hamilton together, Hamilton already had a title. If you could go back to Senna Prost went into that relationship already with titles. But yeah, that thing where they're both going for their first title and they don't know how many more are going to be on the table into the future, that adds this extra element to it as well. So yeah, I think it's great. It's great to see. Above all, I think that we really do have a championship that's going to ebb and flow. We're going to have times when it looks like Norris isn't really performing at his best. Piastri seems to be more consistent, but because Norris can then maybe bring that level up a little bit and close back in, hopefully we're going to have this ebb and flow throughout the whole season, right down to the wire.
But to your point, I think that added pressure of them both going for their first title makes this all the more exciting. And I think what's been impressive from a team perspective is it's often easier to be the hunter than the hunted. Like, maintaining success when you haven't had success in a long time, I think it's really difficult. And so we obviously saw McLaren on this meteoric rise at the end of last season. And the question was, okay, well, are they going to pick up right where they left off? But then are they going to be able to maintain that success with these 2 younger drivers? And they've been able to do that. And so now they are clearly the hunted. And I think that they've embraced that and they've done really well with the pressure added in being that kind of bullseye target on your back, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, they definitely have. And that's a massive testament to Zach Brown's Andrea Stella. Because if you wind the clock back, we're coming up to Silverstone. It was Silverstone 2023 where McLaren had just kind of introduced an upgrade in Austria. They'd kind of had a good race, and suddenly they kind of vaulted to the front as kind of podium contenders. And it was like, wow, like out of nowhere. But for years, they hadn't done anything. They'd had that one win with Ricciardo, and that was about it. So they have done a great job. And just on that as well, on the hunted and the hunter, I do wonder which of the 2 drivers prefers that more. I get the feeling that Norris has got some of the worst stuff of his season out,
the way.
He's got it out of the way early, and now he's in a position where he can, he's still within in distance of Piastri. I don't know, it feels like obviously it's only 2 races since he crashed into Piastri, but he's still 15 points behind, has made a ton of mistakes this season, and yet is still right up there, kind of challenging. So it feels like being the hunter has kind of suited him maybe a little bit in that situation. And Piastri, like Laurence was saying, I think Piastri doesn't
care
when he is. He's just going to drive it as fast as he can. But interesting with Norris, I think that coming into the season, winning the first race, leading the championship, it was almost like, okay, well, Lando's going to win now, right? Like that's kind of where everyone's head was at after Australia, and maybe there was part of Lando's head there as well. And I think he's had to go through that moment of, you know, can I beat this guy in the other car? There was a great moment, wasn't there, where at the end of the race in Austria, where Lando kind of he was in that kind of mood Lando can be in, where he was like, "Is he just faster than me everywhere now? Like, where can I get pace?" And you hear that kind of that, and you hear Will Joseph trying to kind of coax him back around to like, believe in yourself, Lando, you can do this. So I think that dynamic is way better than the two of them colliding and taking pot shots at each other in the media. You've got two completely different drivers. And yeah, so on that point about the hunter and hunted, it works for drivers as well as teams as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that has given him reassurance is that if you look at Monaco, he was the fastest of 2 drivers. Spain, okay, not. In Imola, if you go back before Monaco, he ended up ahead of Piastri by the finish. And then in Canada, despite everything that went wrong, he was also the fast driver. And then Austria, he was the fastest driver again. So I think, that's the thing that underlying is giving Lando this confidence. And that, exchange with the radio, which I think a lot of people picked up in Austria, I think that's just the way Lando drives, and it is, you can see it as, maybe a weakness, or no, it feels like the other guy's faster, but he's also striving for perfection. And this is something that Lando said a lot, and I think often gets kind of misconstrued slightly in the media, is that he's kind of looking for every single opportunity to go that little bit faster. And the other thing that's really helped him do that is that McLaren brought a different setup option with the front suspension. Is kind of an upgrade, but it's also, they're referring it more to as just a different setup option. And that's given Lando more confidence to get the performance that he knows he can, and with less fear of making a mistake. So I think, there are actual reasons as well underlying why Lando should actually have confidence going into the second half of the season, despite Piastri's metronomic consistency, the fact that he's 15 points ahead.
I think our producers, Quentin and Zach, probably got more than they bargained for with the McLaren Cold War conversation. So I've got 2 more producer questions. After Max Verstappen's DNF in Austria, I don't know how I feel about this question, but it is a producer question, so it's fair. Laz, do you feel like there's a chance Verstappen's mentally checked out of this 2025 season?
I think when the visor's down, you can never accuse Verstappen of mentally checking out. I think he, for a long time, has been saying, look, I don't really think this championship's on. The car isn't good enough. We don't have the performance to fight the McLarens. And I think a bit of that is trying to just get the very best from his team, make sure that if there is performance on the table, it gets found and it gets added to the car. But I think he's been realistic about this from the start. And you can call that mentally checking out, or you can just call it being realistic. And the one thing Max will never do is try and build up a narrative, to try and say that he's still in it or that he's not in it at all. I think he genuinely just says it like it is, or like he feels it is. So, he's... I don't think he's checked out. I think he's still giving absolutely everything in the races. But I think there is now a point where, realistically, 61 points, the only way he can overhaul that, even being as good as Max Verstappen is to have a faster car than McLaren. Just because the other 2 drivers, got to give them respect. They're going to get results over the rest of the season. And right now, Red Bull doesn't have a faster car than McLaren over a variety of tracks. Occasionally, it will be a quicker car in Max's hands, but it doesn't have it consistently. And Max knows that's what he needs, and he doesn't have it. So, I think if all of a sudden Red Bull bring a magic update to Silverstone, or the update that was put on the car in Austria, they find more performance from it, and Max, just starts winning race after race after race, I think you'll see him completely change again. And so, that's why I wouldn't say it's checking out. But the other interesting question with Max at the moment, and I think he's more reluctant to talk about this than anything else, is where his future lies. And I don't know whether...
Toto Wolff's not backing away from talking about it. A lot of people have a lot of things to say about Max, but not Max himself.
Yeah, and George Russell as well, kind of aware that, saying that Verstappen's indecision over where his future is going to be is delaying Russell's own contract from being signed. So that's getting an interesting kind of distraction away from it all. Max absolutely doesn't want that to be played out in the media. Toto doesn't want that to be played out in the media. But I think Russell actually threw it into the media on Thursday in Austria, purely to try and get some cogs moving and like get some answers from his team boss, and also probably, you know, to put a bit of extra pressure on Max because they're not the closest of friends.
I feel like George doesn't get enough credit for being as savvy as he is. I think we've called him a prefect from Harry Potter on this show before because he seems like the perfect houseboy. But I think he's a little savvy. He knows what he's doing.
If you're George Russell as well, I do wonder how frustrating that must be. You know that a four-time world champion being on the market means your team's going to explore that. But, you know, George has probably been one of the standout performers of the season. If you look at the whole season as a whole, see Max is up there as well. George has stepped into this season with no Lewis at the team. You know, he's won in Montreal. There was a run, wasn't there, where he was on the podium about 5 or 6 races straight, and yet he's still kind of having to deal with this stuff. So I did find it interesting that he was the one that kind of opened up that discussion. But there's a good point from Laurence. I hadn't considered that he was actually probably doing that just to be like, look, you know,
move it along.
You need to be asked about this now, Toto, because, you know, publicly. And Toto actually faced a lot of questions about it. He spoke on Sky about it. He spoke to the media about it on Sunday night. And you can tell he's trying to do two things, isn't he, Toto? He's trying to distance himself from the idea that he can sign Max. He keeps saying it's not that likely, but at the same time, he's like, well, but if there is an option, you know, you want to be there. And I think tellingly with that discussion, what he said at the weekend was, it might not even be a next year thing. I think he's also open to the idea of like, look, in 28, Max might go all the way to 28 with Red Bull, but I want to know that I've got Max Verstappen for 29, even if it's now. You know, I wouldn't put it past someone like Toto Wolff, very pragmatic, but very always thinking about what's best for Mercedes' future, to be like, right, we're going to have an agreement with Max that as it stands, he's racing for us whenever he finishes with Red Bull. You can imagine that kind of wording in a Formula One deal, can't you? Like whenever you decide to leave Red Bull, whether it's 28 or whether it's earlier, you're coming to race for Mercedes. So could see that happening. But it does feel like it's got to be Russell just based on how well he's done. But yeah, maybe prefect has been harsh. Maybe we need to come up with a new savvy. It's like yeah. We're trying to think of a better one.
I mean, prefects usually, I mean, I wasn't a prefect at school. My school didn't have prefects in it. It wasn't that kind of school. But I think that's usually a good thing, right? I mean, we don't mean it as a negative
You're
thing.
straight edge. You're on top of it.
No, it was never a bad thing.
But also for all the kind of people who love a good like conspiracy theory or love to kind of sleuth the internet as well. George Russell's bio on Instagram recently changed from Mercedes AMG Petronas F1 team driver to Formula One driver.
Oh,
British flag image. I mean, what do you make of that? Is that something where we're reading too much into it? It's actually controlled
not
by
at all. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Those
has merit.
Yeah, kind of interesting. So I think George is aware of his position and his, I guess, quality as a driver, and is willing to make that work for him in these contract negotiations that he's going through. I remember that's the other thing that it is contract negotiations. George will be looking to get as much money as possible out of Mercedes over the next however many years. And that's the other thing that I think, you know, Toto is really waiting on. Like Nate said, if you know Max isn't going to be available in 26, but 27, there's a clause that allows him to release, or, you know, obviously after 28, we know the contract ends, then you want to leave yourself the flexibility when negotiating with George to have him on a 1+1, or, you know, if you're going to do a 2+1, what do you do when Max becomes available? So I think all of that is, you know, is what's going on. And George, quite rightly, you know, at the end of it, he's a Formula One driver, wants to be a world champion, competing for himself, wants to be in the best team. You know, you've got to kind of use every weapon in your armory, you know, whether that be on track, off track, to get that.
And not to say that we want to see George Russell get the shaft, because we certainly don't, and he's a very deserving driver, as you guys have laid out. But every team principal, Toto Wolff included, has an obligation to do its best for their team. Yep. Unfortunately, they're fantastic athletes in whatever sport that are overlooked and overshadowed because they came up in the same time period as a generational talent. Yep. And unfortunately, for some of these drivers, they just happen to be in the era with Max Verstappen, right? This unicorn. I mean, you could think about like Tom Brady, you could think of Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, whatever the sport may be. Like, they were great quarterbacks during Tom Brady's stint in the NFL for 20 years, but you didn't really get to hear much about him because we were so focused on Tom Brady's greatness. And you could say that for so many different sports. I think it's sometimes unfortunate that a lot of these drivers have been on the grid with Max Verstappen and then previous to that, Lewis Hamilton. So you can't blame a team principal for if there is any sliver of hope that you could sign somebody like Max Verstappen, you would certainly do it, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we've got an example closer to home with Carlos Sainz last year in Ferrari. You know, in most logical circumstances, you extend Carlos Sainz. You say, look, you've been driving the wheels off that Ferrari for 2 years. Again, a bit like I just said with Russell, I think Sainz last year and the year before was one of the standout performers. And yet you've got Lewis Hamilton's available. In what world do you say
Do not take it.
we're not going to take Lewis because Sainz has been doing all right recently? You say no, we're going for Lewis. So it is the same thing. And sometimes you're right. There's a difference, isn't there, between being very good and being great. And George hasn't had the opportunity yet to prove that he is great. I don't think he might well do, but you need that car to have that moment to say, look, I'm a world champion. And obviously Max has shown us above and beyond that. I mean, he's, possibly the most special talent we've seen, in modern times. George hasn't been able to do that yet. So as long as that option is available, and I do wonder as well, I mean, part of me does wonder if part of Toto Wolff's mind has been like, I think Antonelli probably is the get out here, but he's probably part of him has thought, man, if only I could put George and Max together in the same team, make a super team out of those two guys. I don't think you would now with Kimi, but I think if it was any other two drivers, you think, well, maybe I'll just, maybe I don't know, maybe we'll loan Kimi out to some, to Aston or to Alpine or something like that and just put Max and Russell together and just see how it goes. But because it's those two, you're like, it's got to be one or the other. You can't have the two of those guys in the same place, surely. Okay?
You don't think that George Russell's personality could be a good match for Max?
That would be the opposite of the Cold War we were talking about. That would be full-on nuclear war, bombs going off, mushroom clouds all over the place. It would be awful. For Toto Wolff, I mean, it'd be great box office entertainment, but if you're managing a Formula One team, it would be terrible.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned Lewis Hamilton, so I want to hit the Oracle stat of the week. Okay, it's brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move over to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Lewis Hamilton, Laurence Edmondson, has been on the podium in Silverstone every year since 2014, over a decade. What are the realistic expectations for Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari in the British Grand Prix this weekend?
The realistic expectations are pretty low, I would say, given the performance of that car throughout the year and the fact you're going to have two McLarens that are pretty quick. You have Max Verstappen coming back. I mean, you got to remember Max, missed out on a chance to qualify better in Austria because he got caught up with that yellow flag caused by Pierre Gasly in Q3, and then his race lasted 3 corners before he got taken out by Kimi Antonelli. So I think had Verstappen raced throughout Austria, then you would have seen him closer to the Ferraris, which obviously looked good in Austria, and that's where you'd have some hope for this stat. But I was looking at the weather forecast, and it looks pretty wet. And
who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought it in good old Great Britain that the rain would be on the horizon? But it is. And if you look back to last year, no one in the days before the British Grand Prix had Lewis Hamilton winning that race on, as a likelihood. And so you got to feel that, yeah, it's a possibility. And you got to feel that, if the rain hits as well, then it's really just going to be about making the right decisions at the right time. In some cases, Ferrari have got that right this year. In many, they haven't. But there have been, green shoots of recovery on the strategy side. So I feel like I'm not going to say no. I'm going to give a really kind of half and half answer, but
I'll take it.
But because it's Lewis and because it's Silverstone and because of that stat, actually, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to go with it. I'm going to say yes. He's going to be on the podium.
Well, and it's just different for him. I feel like, right? Like every time he gets to Silverstone, like he pumps up that chest and he performs to the best of his ability, regardless of how the car is doing. There's been obviously a big heat wave. Is the temperature going to drop by this weekend?
Yeah, so it should drop tomorrow. My laptop is currently hotter than anywhere else in England right now, so I'm hoping it is. I can hear it trying to take off from my desk. But yeah, as of tomorrow, so Wednesday, when people are listening, temperature drops right down, and then we get some Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen weather by the weekend, which I think is going to be a good news for everyone.
Okay, well, if you drop out, we'll know that it's laptop related, and we'll just carry on, and Laz will finish out the show. I want to do a Silverstone breakdown real quick, Laz. What kind of racing are we expecting? What role could tires play?
This track is usually great for racing. It's usually one of the best there is, because you have that variety of super high speed corners, which are fantastic to watch Formula One cars go through. Again, any F1 fan, I'd recommend get yourself down to Maggots Beckett's Chapel at some point in your F1 viewing time and watch a car through there, because it's fantastic. But then there's overtaking opportunities as well. And, I mean, I'm sure people listening can reel off the great races we've had in recent years. The current generation of cars have really kind of lent themselves to the circuit. Because it's likely going to be wet on Sunday, I think we're going to see a lot of intermediate tyres on the cars. If not, there is always a possibility for strategy variation at Silverstone. If it's that little bit cooler and dry, then you might see teams just trying to go for the one stop. But yeah, it's one that you get enough variety in strategy and enough opportunities to overtake that usually it's pretty exciting. It's in some ways similar to the Red Bull Ring, so we saw McLaren be super dominant there. But in some ways it's not. It's got high speed corners, but they're not really long duration high speed corners, and they're also often combined, so a series of high speed corners, and that actually plays to different strengths in different cars. So I wouldn't be surprised, especially if the temperatures drop, to see Mercedes all of a sudden back in the running. A few people thought they were going to continue their performance through from Canada into Austria. They didn't, but actually I think they could come back up if the temperature's low in Silverstone. So yeah, I think it's genuinely open, and it has been in previous years as well when we've had a dominant car. Sometimes this track's just been able to offer something a bit more exciting.
So would you then, Laz, give the edge to Mercedes over, say, Ferrari at this track?
I would say all temperature related. So
Okay.
if this heat wave does continue, and let's hope Nate's laptop survives into the weekend so that I don't have to do all the writing. If this heat wave continues, then you'd put the money on Ferrari to put in a similar performance to Austria. But if the temperature drops, I think all of a sudden Mercedes is going to be able to access a lot of that performance. Mercedes actually came out of Austria with a bit of a dilemma of what to do, because they brought a new rear suspension to the car, which worked brilliantly in Canada. They thought, great, we'll keep it on the car in Austria. And they actually felt that was one of the reasons that they were really struggling with overheating tires in Austria. So again, that is once again tire temperature related, but they're going to run some tests, I imagine, through practice to try and basically figure out what the best setup is for that Mercedes going in there. So there's that question mark hanging over the Mercedes as well.
Nate, when it comes to Yuki Tsunoda, Max Verstappen's counterpart at Red Bull, what do you think Red Bull would consider an acceptable result from Yuki this weekend? Well, I think we would both love to know what Nate thinks about that situation, but it's fair to say that he is officially done on today's episode of Unlapped because his laptop has gone kaput. So Laz, I'll turn it to you. What do you think would be an acceptable result for Yuki Tsunoda this weekend?
I do agree with Nate. I think points have to be the target. I mean, they really should be the target at every single Grand Prix in a Red Bull. But this does throw out the wider question of what on earth is going on with that Red Bull, because now the solution clearly isn't just to cycle through another driver. Isaac Hadjar's looking great, brilliant, but I think the last thing he needs right now is to be dropped into that car, which we know is very difficult to drive. At the start of this year, Tsunoda looked like, a good step better than Hadjar, as you would expect, the more experienced of the two drivers. He's gone in there and just really struggled. And I mean, Austria was almost like a new low, just unable to get any grip from the tires in qualifying. Max said he had a similar issue, but obviously still went through to Q3. But yeah, Yuki's got to have a Q3 appearance. I think he's got to get some points. I don't think he's at risk as much, just because I think Red Bull are also aware that cycling through drivers is not the option. But if Yuki wants to have a career beyond the end of this season, certainly at Red Bull, then he needs to start getting points, because it's really kind of damaging his stock. It was so high going into the season. I felt he was the right driver for that Red Bull seat. I still, to be honest, looking at all of Red Bull's options, I still think he is absolutely the right guy, but he just somehow needs to, get some performance from it, because otherwise he's going to get to the end of the season, all the other seats looking like they're filling up quite quickly, and who's going to take the gamble on Yuki then if he's had such a bad time at Red Bull? But I really feel for the guy, because I know he's a better driver than he's shown right now.
Well, I can imagine the frustration, right? To wait and wait and wait and finally get the opportunity. And when you get the call up, then the car is so difficult to drive. You don't feel like you're able to show or put your best foot forward on track. Like, I can't imagine how that mentally takes a toll. So to your point, I think we all root for Yuki Tsunoda, and he's finally got this opportunity, but I hope that he's able to see it through and they put him in a car that's better fitted for him and that he's able to find some success. And hopefully he's able to in the second half of the season. You mentioned being at risk. There's rumors out there that Franco Colapinto could possibly be replaced by Valtteri Bottas. Any credibility to those rumors? Could we see the mullet man back out?
Yeah, I mean, credit to the race who put this story forward. I mean, Franco Colapinto at the moment is at the end of his initial 5-race trial period that we were told was what he was going to get, and then they were going to make a call on whether Doohan goes back in the car or Colapinto goes forward. They've kind of scrapped that now, and even in the races immediately after Colapinto got the call up, Flavio Briatore said, no, that's not the case. And it's, you know, it's more race by race and we want to see what Franco can do. But I think it's just been such a tough situation to be dropped into that car that clearly isn't performing particularly well. Alpine are now bottom of the Constructors' Championship, and by quite some way, because Sauber all of a sudden have hit some form, especially with Bortoletto in Austria, but with Nico Hülkenberg for some time now. And so all of a sudden he's in a car that, you know, obviously isn't the class of the midfield, and yet you know, he's also expected to perform and drive for his career. So that's an incredibly tough situation. I can understand why Alpine would be looking to Valtteri Bottas. He's on the market. He's an experienced, safe pair of hands. He would fit in alongside Pierre Gasly. You'd probably expect those two drivers to get similar results, certainly once Valtteri gets up to speed in the Alpine. So I can see the logic behind it, but I think it would be a shame because I don't think that Jack Doohan got the chance that he deserved once he'd been given that seat. And I don't think yet Franco Colapinto's had the chance he deserves, and also didn't get the entry into the seat that he deserved. You know, to come in midway through the season and your first 2 races to be Imola and Monaco, races that really punish mistakes, that's tough. So yeah, a messy situation, but I think that just sums up Alpine right now.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look real quick back at podium predictions from Austria. Last, you got 2 points. Nicely done. You correctly predicted that Charles Leclerc would finish P3, Oscar Piastri P2. You did put Max Verstappen finishing atop the podium. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Yeah. But luckily for you, Nate and Nicole got 0 points this weekend. So 2 points for you, you are now tied for the lead. Okay, 0 points for everyone else. So as it stands, Nicole and Laz both have 10 points. Nate has 5 points. I have 2 points, even though that I have only predicted for 2 races this season. So just for the record, I'd like it to reflect that I lead in points per race with 1 point per race. So I'm going to throw my hat in for this weekend. But first, Nicole has sent hers in, okay, for Silverstone. She's predicting Lewis Hamilton, P3, on the podium. So the streak continues, thanks to Oracle Stat of today. Oscar Piastri, P2, and Lando Norris, P1. Now, luckily for us, Nate Saunders' cell phone still works in the heat in London. He has texted his predictions in. He's going with Lewis Hamilton, P3, so keeping the streak alive. Lando Norris, P2. Max Verstappen, P1, and he has in parentheses, in the rain. He thinks Max gets the win in the rain. So I turn it over to you. Laz, what say you?
Well, because we had that Oracle Stat of the week, and I talked myself into thinking that Lewis would be on the podium, I'm going to put Lewis in P3 too. So that's 3 of us with Lewis in P3. But I can't, actually, I was going to go for Nicole's prediction. I hadn't seen it at the bottom of our rundown, but there it is with Oscar second and Lando first. I'm just going to switch the McLaren drivers around so that we don't have exactly the same prediction, and say Lando Norris second, Oscar Piastri to win. Over to you, Katie, to keep your streak most points per prediction alive, I think is what you want.
It's like, it's not. Yeah, are you? Thank you. Okay, I appreciate that very much. I'm going to split the Papaya drivers. I'm going to go Oscar Piastri, P3. Oh, do I want to do that? Yeah, Oscar Piastri, P3. Lewis Hamilton, P2, just because I'm feeling nostalgic. And then Lando Norris, P1. So back-to-back race wins for Mr. Lando Norris. And we'll see how we fare. Thank you as always. It's so good to see you. I'm so glad to have done this with you. I'm sorry that Nate went kaputs on us, but at least we got 30 minutes out of him from his analysis. And as always, thank you guys for watching and listening. Remember, leave us a comment and hit us with the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the new ESPN F1 channel for more F1 content. If you're listening, hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move over to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Cheers. Good to see you, Laz.